Celeste. I was thinking this morning about how, as survivors of childhood trauma, we have a tendency to put our focus on people and things outside ourselves. We look at others as either our saviors or our abusers, and we don't see clearly the part of the situation that belongs to us. It goes along with the awareness that as children, not only did we not get what we needed, but we were being physically, mentally, or emotionally damaged by people who were supposed to be caring for us. This can warp our perceptions of what loving relationships really look and feel like. We can't believe we have choices because we've never had them before. And even though as adults we can make different choices, our minds continue to tell us that we're stuck. Taking care of ourselves, putting ourselves first, it's just a choice, right? But in a real way, we've been programmed not to, because we didn't have the power to save ourselves as children. And at some level, we still think we can't. Another thing that happens in childhood trauma is that we become disconnected from our bodies because we learned when we were young that it wasn't safe or comfortable to know what was happening to us. It doesn't feel safe to be there, so we aren't. We're not present. We numb out. And as we grow older, it's not a choice anymore. It's autopilot, and that is a big problem. And it's a barrier to our recovery because we are one being, body, mind, and spirit. It's all connected. They aren't separate. But in a real way, trauma has created barriers between the body and the mind. So when we only live in our heads, when we only pay attention to our thoughts, we don't necessarily know what's actually happening in the present. Our minds can be like that old vinyl record with the big scratch down the middle. It will only play the part that's been played before. We can't even imagine anything new or different. The brain just continues to believe and replay the script from what was true in the past, when we were 2, or when we were 5, or when we were 10, whatever. But if we don't take the steps to change and heal the damage, it will continue to run that script throughout our lifetimes. Sometimes we have to make some difficult choices. And the gift, though, is that on the other side of those choices, those tough choices, is freedom. When I was in my early 40s, and I'm now 65, I started taking yoga. I started taking yoga because my body was in rebellion. And you know, back then we didn't know about childhood trauma. I mean, we knew that things happened in our childhood homes that weren't okay, but we never called it CPTSD or childhood trauma. Back then, they didn't know that abuse and neglect in childhood had long-term effects on the quality of life someone would experience in the future. And it wasn't until the CDC study in 1989 that they learned there can be real health consequences for people who grow up in adverse situations. And it wasn't until probably at least 25 years after that that they figured out that it was not just physically detrimental, but it negatively affected the whole person. Childhood trauma is emotionally devastating, mentally and physically damaging, spiritually exhausting to our well-being and our health. And when they started to understand that, things did start to change. But what hasn't shifted enough is the acknowledgement of the connection between the mind, the body, the emotions, and the spirit. So in that time frame, about 20, maybe 25 years ago-ish, I started taking yoga classes because my exercise of choice had been running, and that wasn't possible anymore. I was emotionally, physically, and spiritually devastated. I hurt. I was exhausted all the time. I had no desire to do anything. I had been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, chronic myofascial pain, and IBS. And at one point, I was walking with a cane. I couldn't run, but I wanted to stay physically fit. And you know, that was vanity. It was. I wanted to look good. And it's not that isn't important. I'm not saying that. But it was really overly important to me. I thought that if I looked good, people would think I was good. So I started taking yoga, and I started in a gentle class because I didn't really have a choice. But eventually, yoga started to make a difference. My body started to change. I hadn't gotten in touch with myself really though, but I was doing the poses and I was getting stronger and I was more flexible, but I wasn't really embodied. And when I started taking more advanced classes, I realized some things about myself that really scared me because I thought something was wrong with my brain. I had an instructor that would give cues about body positioning and movement and muscle engagement, and I could not make it make sense. I would see her and I would hear her, and I couldn't do it myself. And I didn't understand why I couldn't. I also couldn't understand why I couldn't understand how to do it. And that was the moment of the beginning of clarity, I think, because I made it a point to figure this thing out for myself. And I didn't even know what I was doing, really, but I wanted to be able to get it. I wanted to be able to be in my body. So over the years, I did get better at understanding the words and connecting them to my body and where and how I was in space. And then in 2015, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk published The Body Keeps the Score. And when I read that book, I saw me in those pages. And one of the things that I learned was that an effect of childhood trauma is that people do disconnect from their bodies because they don't feel safe. And they can't really make sense of sensation and feeling in the body all the time. And sometimes they have intense feelings in their bodies that they don't understand. And sometimes they're just overwhelmed and so they numb out. There are all kinds of manifestations of this particular disorder. But he also talked about yoga as being a tool for childhood trauma survivors to heal and reconnect. And I thought, oh my, I'm on the right course. I'm doing the right thing. And at the time, I was also a yoga teacher and in training for yoga therapy. And I realized, you know what? That wasn't an accident. What I believe today is there really are no accidents. There are intentions. And if we are unaware of the intention, there is intention on the path that we take regardless. And it was that awareness that I discovered that yoga therapy was exactly where I needed to be. But what I needed to do with it was different. What I needed to do was to work with other people like me who are childhood trauma survivors and to help them to heal as I had healed. You know, yoga is an ancient science. It's 5,000 something years old. And it's interesting how today you hear doctors talk about the connection of the body and the mind. You don't hear them say spirit usually, but how physical illnesses can manifest in the mind and mental or emotional illnesses can manifest in the body. And now they're even acknowledging that fibromyalgia is actually a symptom of trauma, of childhood trauma. Surprise. So now we're learning all these things, but you know what? The ancient yogis already knew this. Yoga was originally created by some very wise people to help human beings become more conscious, more integrated, more embodied. And that is exactly what trauma survivors need. Because once we understand that we are this multifaceted being, then we have the dynamic connection that allows us to heal ourselves. Because our emotions manifest in our bodies. It's funny, in a way, because we've used language around this for years and haven't connected the dots. Like, have you ever heard the expression, ooh, that man made my skin crawl? Or, that gave me the chills? Or, I've got butterflies in my stomach? Or even, that person is such a pain in the neck. Our emotions have physical manifestations. And these days, many people think of those phrases as simply expressions, but they actually reflect the truth. The body is sending us a message. If we are not paying attention, we don't really know what's going on. That is the root of dysregulation, I think. Because when something triggers us, the first thing that happens is our bodies start to feel it, because our nervous system reacts to what's happening. And we get that immediate tingle up the spine, or the tightening in our gut, or the increase in our pulse and breathing, or our shoulders hunch up by our ears. But if we don't pay attention, or if we're numb, we don't get the message. We might have a sense of discomfort, or even a sense of impending doom, but we've lost the ability to interpret that correctly. And we may try to pretend that everything's okay, but our body is telling us a very different story. And without conscious intervention, the system will overload, and dysregulation is the result. However, it's a really different story when our body sends the message and we're open and listening. Then we will instinctively know how to handle what used to baffle us. And once we find our center and our place of strength internally, we'll be able to act with certainty. That's a real gift. Using yoga practices and working with a coach can help you to reconnect all the facets of who you are, so that you feel your own strength and purpose and find your strong voice again. You'll learn how to breathe through anxiety and move through depression. You'll learn how to walk through challenging situations that used to frighten you, used to dysregulate you. You'll be guided to find your own center and to create a place of safety and peace within. We can find healing, but it begins in the body. Remember, the mind may lie to us, but the body never lies. We need to find the way through the old scripts to get to what's true for us today, right now, in this moment. Who we are now and what are our options. If we don't know that, we won't be able to take the actions to care for ourselves. Instead, we'll always be looking outside ourselves for someone else to blame for our pain, or for someone to rescue us. When I'm working with my clients in my coaching business, I use the practice of yoga. You know, yoga in Sanskrit means union, and it helps them to connect with themselves again. And I believe if we can reconnect, we can heal. I believe that because it's my truth. Originally, yoga was a one-on-one relationship between a teacher and his student, and the teacher worked with that student to help them to find their way through the illusions that kept them stuck. They used practices of physical movement, of breath, meditation, and awareness so that they could become embodied, unified, and whole. But without this awareness, humans are like automatons. We can't change, heal, or grow. As children, we were often powerless over what happened to us. But when we're aware of who we really are as adults, we can make informed choices. Those events from our childhood will always be with us. The question is, can we look at those events without staring at them? Can we be aware of it and not be in it? Because the awareness of it will teach us something. But being in it teaches us nothing. We just continue to go over and over the same scripts and the same behaviors. Maybe not with the same people all the time, but with people that trigger the same responses in us, and that's what needs to change. So it's an inside job. You know, I had a therapist years ago who said to me, the important thing to remember is to keep your feet firmly planted in midair. And that was at our last session. She was right, though. It is the key. There is no completely safe place out there. The only way we can keep our feet firmly planted in the midair around us is if we are firmly grounded from within. If this video spoke to you, please like it below, subscribe to my channel, and check out childhoodtraumacoaching.com. We've got lots of goodies there, including the quick fix practices for re-regulation that you can download for free. Thank you for watching.